Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. And welcome to the second of 3 webinars for the BCRC's Winter 2025 webinar series. Today's webinar will focus on foot and mouth disease, what veterinary teams need to know. I am Kristen Thompson, and Knowledge Mobilization Specialist with the BCRC, and I will be your moderator this evening. We are happy to be able to put these webinars on through the Knowledge Dissemination and Technology Transfer Project funded by the Canadian Beef Cattle Checkoff and Canada's Beef Science Cluster. This webinar is also made possible through collaboration with Animal Health Canada. Before we get started, I'm going to go over a couple of housekeeping rules. You will be able to see and hear myself and our speakers, but we cannot see or hear you. We ask that if you do have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer them at the end of the webinar in a live Q&A session. This webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending out the recording to all who have registered in about 3 to 5 business days. You can find recordings of all of our past webinars and other great videos on our website, beefresearch.ca, or on our YouTube channel. This webinar is also available for CE credits for veterinarians and registered veterinary technologists across Canada. If you identified yourself as a vet or RVT when registering for this webinar, you should receive your certificate via email in the next few days. Remember, you have to stay for the entire webinar to be eligible for the CE credit. CE credits are also available for past webinars, which are listed on our website. Credits can be obtained by watching the webinar recording and receiving 80% or higher on the associated quiz. For more information on CE credits, please visit beefresearch.ca/CE credit. This page provides details on how to receive credit for both live and recorded events and includes some frequently asked questions. If you have any further questions or have not received your certificate within a week of the live webinar or completion of the quiz, you can contact Dana Parker, whose contact information is up on the screen. On beefresearch.ca, we have a number of resources available with information on foot and mouth disease. This includes a topic webpage, which has additional information on what you need to know to understand, respond, and prepare for FMD, as well as an animated video demonstrating how important following prevention and quarantine recommendations are for Canadian travelers. Through collaboration with Animal Health Canada, several new resources have been recently released, including the comic strip that you see up on the screen, and a 2-part video series highlighting how to spot the signs of FMD and the importance of preventative measures for keeping FMD out of Canada. To remain updated on these and other new resources, subscribe to our mailing lists, and I will include a link to that in the chat a bit later on. I would now like to invite Kemi with Animal Health Canada to provide a brief highlight of their current initiatives on FMD preparedness. Kemi will be around for the rest of the webinar and available to answer questions at the end along with our speakers. Kemi, if you're able to turn your video and audio on. Kemi is the project lead at the Emergency Management Division of Animal Health Canada. She serves as the liaison for the AHC BCRC Collaboratory Project, supporting the development and distribution of biosecurity resources for Canadian producers. She is a foreign-trained veterinarian and holds a master's degree in epidemiology from the Ontario Veterinary College at the University of Guelph. Kemi, if you're able to turn your audio on, I can't see you.
Oh, can you see me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Christine, for the kind introduction, and good evening, everyone. On behalf of Animal Health Canada, I want to extend a sincere thank you to all of you for taking the time to join us for today's webinar. We also want to express our gratitude to the Beef Cattle Research Council, BCRC, for collaborating with Animal Health Canada on this important initiative. We truly appreciate the opportunity to share our work and highlight the collaboration between our organizations. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'd like to take a moment here to share a little about who we are at Animal Health Canada and the role we play in strengthening animal health and disease preparedness in Canada. We are a national organizations that play a pivotal role in fostering partnership between government, industry, and other stakeholders. Our focus is on strengthening the health and welfare of farm animals, enhancing our preparedness for emerging animal health challenges, and ensuring the resilience of Canada's livestock sector. Some of our top priorities include creating a proactive, coordinated approach to managing animal diseases, supporting biosecurity efforts, and preparing for foreign animal diseases like foot and mouth disease. For more information about our work, I encourage you to visit our website at animalhealthcanada.ca. Through our collaboration with Beef Cattle Research Council, we've developed and distributed a range of biosecurity resources, many of which Christine earlier mentioned. These resources have been shared across both Animal Health Canada and BCRC social media platforms. Additional resources are currently under development and will be shared to help producers and industry professionals stay informed and prepared. This webinar is also presented in partnership with Beef Cattle Research Council. It is designed to provide veterinarians and veterinary teams with practical advice on FMD and highlight the Canadian Food Inspection Agency's current regulations. It will cover key questions such as what clinical signs you should look for, what steps should you take in event of an outbreak, how to properly report a case, what advice you can offer to producers, and how you can identify high-risk management systems. By improving our ability to detect and respond to FMD effectively and staying up to date on regulatory expectations, we can strengthen emergency preparedness and implement the best possible disease prevention and management strategies to protect both animal health and industry sustainability. Next slide, please. All right, this slide shows some of our resources, all of which are available on our website. The first two documents on your left are currently under review, and the updated versions will be available soon. Meanwhile, the producer workbook on the right provides valuable information along with varieties of customizable tools and templates designed to help producers strengthen their emergency preparedness. This resources serves as a foundation for important discussions, enhance readiness, and improve the ability to respond quickly and effectively to unexpected events. Next slide, please. Okay, I would like to encourage participants here to register for the 2025 FMD Preparedness Emergency Preparation course for Canada. It is race accredited. The deadline for registration is February 14th, and the course runs from February 18th to March 28th. Limited seats are available. So this course is developed through a partnership of Animal Health Canada with the European Commission for Control of Foot and Mouth Disease of the Food and Agriculture Organization, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and funded by the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership. I would also like to mention that an introduction to Incident Command System, ICS 100, the emergency management for agriculture, is also available on our website. Deadline for registration is February 16 rather. This course offers a thorough understanding of the ICS principles and shows how to apply them to real-life situations in agriculture sector, including animal disease outbreaks. Links to register for both, they're on the screen right now. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so lastly, I'd like to appreciate the speakers for sharing their invaluable expertise on this topic, to our collaborator, the Beef Cattle Research Council, for partnering with Animal Health Canada to deliver this initiative, and to our funding partner, the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership, for providing the funds to ensure the success of this project. Thank you once again for being part of this important discussion, and I look forward to an impactful, interesting, and engaging webinar. So now let's dive into today's program, and back to you, Christine. Thank you.
Thank you, Kemi, for that introduction. Now, without further ado, we have two very exciting speakers for you this evening who are ready to share their thoughts and answer your questions. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Murray Gillies, and invite him to share his screen while I provide an introduction. Murray grew up on his family's dairy farm in Sussex, New Brunswick. He took animal science with a focus on agriculture at the Nova Scotia Agricultural College before completing a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree from the Atlantic Veterinary College in Prince Edward Island. After graduating, he spent 2 years in New Zealand in a dairy-focused clinic before moving back to New Brunswick, where he worked for the government of New Brunswick for 5 years in large animal practice. Currently, he is the interim director of the Canadian Animal Health Surveillance System, a division of Animal Health Canada. He is a past president of the Canadian Association of Bovine Veterinarians and the current District 12 director for the American Association of Bovine Practitioners. He is also currently working on a master's in health management and public health at the Atlantic Veterinary College with a project focusing on antimicrobial use. He was also the dairy subject matter expert for the Canadian Veterinary Medical Association's Stewardship of Antimicrobial Use by Veterinarians initiative in 2018 and 2022. Murray remains very active in the day-to-day operations of his family's dairy farm. He is very passionate about the Canadian bovine, veterinary, and agricultural sectors and enjoys discussing these topics and science in general, and can be reached to discuss these topics at any time. With that, I will turn it over to you, Murray, and stop sharing.
So thanks again for that introduction, Kristen. Thank you to my colleague Kemi, my Animal Health Canada colleague Kemi, for the words that she provided at the beginning, and thank you to the BCRC for the opportunity to present this late evening from New Brunswick. I'm extremely honored, actually, this evening to be presenting alongside my esteemed and highly respected colleague, Dr. Toupin, who you will hear from after me. So as Kemi said, let's take a dive into foot and mouth disease. What we're going to briefly cover in my section this evening is a few tidbits on foot and mouth disease, the clinical symptoms, testing requirements for field veterinarians, treatment, biosecurity, and then we'll end off with sort of my favorite, which is preparedness. And the reason why we're doing all of this is to completely avoid and not have to go through the situation that you see in the picture on the right of the slide with the outbreak of this disease and the mass destruction and disposal of a lot of animals. We're taking these exercises now so that we never have to deal with foot and mouth disease, or if we do have to deal with it, we can control it very quickly and on a very small scale basis before it gets out of control. So a couple tidbits. You can see a nice little nasty picture of that virus in the top right-hand corner of the slide. Just looks like the disease that it actually causes as far as viruses go. The definition of foot and mouth disease is a severe, highly contagious viral disease of cattle, swine, sheep, and other cloven-hoofed animals such as goats, deer, and bison. So all cloven-hoofed animals are affected. Horses are not affected, and that is important when we just talk about the differentials a little later on. If you can remember some virology, I'm certainly not a virologist, but foot and mouth disease is caused by a non-enveloped aftovirus. The non-enveloped viruses are a little harder to kill when it comes to disinfection, and they cause a bit more inflammation due to a lot of cell lysis they're able to exert, which is why we get the blisters and the things with this disease. The incubation period is very short, 2 days, up to 14 days. Now, the World Organization of Animal Health recognizes 14 days as the incubation period, but it can be very short as well. There's 7 viral serotypes, A, O, C, SAT1, 2, 3, and Asia 1. They're spread all throughout the world. Serotype O, relatively common. That's the serotype that broke out in Germany just recently. Knowing the serotype is very important, and Jen will probably talk about vaccines and matching the vaccines in her section, but having the serotype known for the outbreak is highly important. Foot and mouth disease symptoms, and I think this this infographic from the BCRC and Animal Health Canada describes it and sums it up perfectly. I actually don't think you could ask for a better infographic for the signs and symptoms of foot and mouth disease. So what do we got? Fever, blisters on the tongue, blisters in the lips, the mouth, the teats, the hooves, excessive salivation, drooling of the animals, depression, anorexia, lameness, reluctance to move, very, very sore feet, pain in the mouth, reluctance to eat for the animals as well. A few other symptoms not listed that you may see a bit more rarely is that calves and lambs may also get a myocarditis, and they can die from that myocarditis, so something that might be seen on postmortem. Sheep may abort or have higher rates of mummification, and pigs may dog sit as well. So alongside these symptoms, there are a few other strange ones, as with most diseases. Foot and mouth disease differentials. And so these are relatively important. You can see, again, a picture of foot and mouth disease on the top right in cattle and pigs. The primary differential disease for foot and mouth disease is vesicular stomatitis. So in the bottom right, this is a horse with vesicular stomatitis. Horses, as I stated, don't get foot and mouth disease, but horses and cloven-hoofed animals can get vesicular stomatitis. Vesicular stomatitis is also sporadically reported in the United States, and Canada is also at risk of having this disease come in as well. And due to its resemblance of foot and mouth disease, it is of importance. So if you're dealing with a large feedlot and you have the outbreaks of the clinical signs that you saw on the slide before, and the pen rider horses are also affected, it's probably not foot and mouth disease, it's probably vesicular stomatitis. If you have it in the cows and the horses aren't affected, a little more worried that it might be foot and mouth disease. Other diseases, these ones we don't have in Canada, but they are differentials: swine vesicular disease, vesicular exanthema, blue tongue, and rinderpest. Blue tongue was important in Germany to differentiate their foot and mouth disease mini outbreak that they had. A few other differentials: Seneca Valley virus, mucosal disease, BVD, and infectious bovine rhinotracheitis, herpes. So those two are relatively common in cows. They can cause blisters, lesions in the mouth, and may be mistaken for FMD lesions, or may resemble FMD lesions. Other things: bovine papular stomatitis, and then contact dermatitis. So burns, scars, something else out there that the animals got into that would cause sort of those lesions in the mouth or on the feet. Have a good look for those things as well, because those can also resemble foot and mouth disease, and those little accident type things can happen. A couple slides here on aging of lesions. So a couple bit of information on what you're going to be seeing based on the day that you're inspecting these lesions. And then the next slide will have some pictures more to follow on. And so the easiest way that I think of to remember these aging of the lesions with foot and mouth disease is it very closely mimics what would happen if we get a blister on our feet. So day one, you get that fluid-filled vesicle. Day two, the vesicle ruptures. You get sort of the skin flap over it, and then you get the inflamed sort of reddish tissue underneath. Day 3 to 4, the rest of the epithelium is lost. The redness sort of becomes pretty pronounced, pretty marked, very painful around this time. Day 5 to 7, epithelial growth starts to come in and take over. It starts to heal. And day 8 onward, the epithelium or the fibrin has filled up the lesion, and it's sort of well on its way to healing after that. The only difference, I guess, between a foot and mouth disease blister and a blister on my foot is that I tend to find that they take about 20 or so days, not day 7. But for foot and mouth disease, by day 7, you should see those lesions be well covered. And for a visual representation of this, we can see the same thing. So day 1 here, we've got those fluid-filled vesicles in the mouth, on the tongue. Day 2, you can see that's popped, very resemblant of a blister that you would pop on your hand, with the skin peeled back, that sort of red, angry skin, exposed skin underneath. By day 4, you can start to see some fibrin moving in here, but still that angry red blister type tissue. By day 6, more fibrin has moved in, sort of covering most of the lesion. And then by day 8 to 10, you can see fibrin has pretty much taken over and the lesion as well on its way to healing. So you may see these at any stage of this, depending on when it's getting reported. So nice to have a visual representation of what that looks like. For testing, the lucky thing for field veterinarians is that there's no testing required at your level. All suspicion of vesicular disease must be reported to your district office. And upon reporting that, the CFIA will initiate their disease investigation, and this includes the testing. So they have go kits all ready to go for a suspicious report of foot and mouth disease. Once you have that suspicion, you report, and they will handle the testing as well as next steps for you. So you don't need to worry about having swabs or tubes or anything for testing of foot and mouth disease. If you have a suspicion of it, you report it, and CFIA will begin their disease investigation. Likewise, for treatment, there's no treatment for this disease. It's viral, it's blisters. There's no treatment for it. And if it does get confirmed to be foot and mouth disease, it has to go through a control process anyway. In endemic countries, because foot and mouth is endemic in some countries, they do supportive care for those cows. Something that you may consider in Canada, if you have the suspicion, is to control pain in those animals. It is very painful while awaiting confirmation of the diagnosis and guidance at that level. The reason why, with no treatment, the reason why I put this slide up is because what I worry about the most is complacency from the field. And so as a field veterinarian, sort of one of my nightmare scenarios is you get a call from a producer who states that last week they had a couple cows with a weird foot rot or a weird lameness. They tried to treat them all with Oxy-LA to see if it would help, and now they're calling, first thing this week because it didn't help, and now more animals are affected. And while that treatment happened to the time where they phone you as a veterinarian to report it, people and animals and day-to-day life has been going on and off on that facility. So obviously, that's why I think last webinar that the BCRC held, the Don't Be a Richard webinar for producers to recognize the lesions is so very important, because as vets, there's not much we're going to be able to do until it's been reported to us. And the longer it takes for that to get reported to us, the more risk we are at further spread of this disease. A very quick note on vaccination, because as I said, Jen's going to cover that more in her section. But vets or vet staff may be asked to assist with vaccination strategies, but CFIA guidance will dictate this. But certainly if I was a producer in a region of a foot and mouth disease outbreak, and I was having to vaccinate my animals, I would want my trusted veterinarian and their staff to be involved in that process. So make sure your staff is up to date on best vaccine practices, management, and everything, and yet you have all the necessary training for those to be able to go out and assist at CFIA's discretion. Risks. So it all comes down to risk. I think the next 3 slides to end off my presentation are the most important, because we don't have foot and mouth disease in Canada, and we don't want it in Canada. What are the risks for it coming in? Well, travel is a big one. So know the travel history of farm workers and visitors. There's active foot and mouth disease outbreaks in Germany, Venezuela, North Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. You can see the red and yellow sections on the map. So anybody who has a travel history to those areas, make sure that is known. Make sure they have no fomites, no boots or anything that they had there and are then taking onto your premise. And absolutely no illegally imported meats, raw dairy products, or wool or hides. Wool or hides is something that often doesn't get considered, but if they bring in sheep hides or wool to use here in Canada, that can also bring the virus in as well. And if that finds its way onto a premise, then you can have an outbreak. So no meats, no imported raw dairies, and no wool or hides. And know that travel history definitely helps with a disease traceback if you know who's been to your farm and who hasn't. Keeping a visitor logbook, which is required on the dairy side and with ProAction, is very helpful for that traceback. This virus can survive for days on fomites, and if there's organic contamination, it can survive for weeks. So don't think that even if you went to Germany 2 weeks ago, it may have persisted in a bit of organic material that may come back on your boots or your clothes or something else. Biosecurity. Kemi talked about how important biosecurity is. It is very, very important for keeping the disease off of your premise, and also if we do end up with an outbreak, for keeping the disease from spreading further. And I know biosecurity is challenging. I was a field vet for quite a few years. Some of these plant premises, it's difficult to get a lot of running water to some places, especially in the winter, especially with a big snowstorm coming. There's lots of forgotten areas. There's lots of nooks and crannies in vehicles and in containers. But I think we all need to do better with biosecurity. So you can look at the list on your screen, all kinds of steps that can be taken. I think it's the most important point is to make sure that we take biosecurity seriously, that we put in the extra effort to make sure that we are doing everything we can to limit the spread of microbes, not just for foot and mouth, but for a whole slew of other diseases as well. Hand washing, hand disinfection. Remember, this is a non-enveloped virus, as I said at the beginning, so it's more difficult to kill. Falls up here in sort of the top part of the disinfection pyramid. So right up there with sort of mycobacteria as a very difficult virus to kill through conventional disinfectants. So make sure you're using a good disinfectant, a good soap, good clean, good scrub to get those non-enveloped viruses like foot and mouth disease. And most importantly, self-quarantine. If you have suspicious symptoms, don't go traveling around or go about your daily business. Report those, stay put, follow the directives of the federal agency, and self-quarantine yourself until that's been worked out. And last but not least, my favorite sort of bit is preparedness, because now is the time to be prepared. So what we call peacetime, when we're not dealing with active outbreaks, now is the time to prepare for avian influenza. Now is the time to prepare for foot and mouth disease. Now is the time to prepare for African swine fever. So what can you do as a veterinarian for preparedness? Well, you can review your client's biosecurity plans, go through all of those things from the resources that Kemi showed, all of the lists from the slide that you just saw. Again, this is mandatory for dairy ProAction, but not mandatory for all the species that are susceptible to foot and mouth disease. Discuss scenarios with clients. And I think this is something that we as veterinarians could certainly do a lot more of. It's kind of fun, actually. I mean, I would sit down with clients. You can have a coffee, you can have a beer, whatever you want. Sit down over a hockey game, go to a breakfast or something, and do a bit of a thought exercise and say, on our premises, what would we do if we had these symptoms? How would we go about responding? Who would we contact? What would we do regarding animal movements? Where would we be moving sick animals on the premise to keep animals separate? You can talk about that and sort of get an idea of what that approach is going to be on each individual premises before there's an outbreak, as opposed to trying to make all those decisions in the middle of an active outbreak. So thought exercises like that, I think, are great. They've certainly been very helpful with avian influenza on the dairy side, thinking about how we would go about addressing those. They would also be very useful for foot and mouth disease. Make sure clients and vet staff know the contacts, the contact numbers, and can get a hold of them quickly. As I said, during an active outbreak is not a great time to try and look up the number for the CFIA district office. That number should be ready to go and well known and programmed into your phone so that you have it and you can report it as opposed to trying to find it. And finally, mental health is a big key thing with these disease outbreaks. Make sure your clients have a good support network for their mental health. A foot and mouth disease outbreak was a very, very stressful event. and it doesn't just go away, it doesn't just stop overnight. So make sure that your clients and yourselves as veterinarians have a very good support network for your mental health. And with that, I will turn it back over to Kristen to get on to the second part of the webinar.
Thank you very much, Murray. That was fantastic. I'll now invite our second speaker, Dr. Geneviève Toupin, to share her screen while I provide an introduction. Dr. Toupin graduated from the University of Montreal Faculty of Veterinary Medicine in St. Hyacinthe in 1997. She worked in private practice for nearly 10 years before joining the Canadian Food Inspection Agency in 2006. She rose through the ranks from district veterinarian to national operations specialist, and now as National Veterinary Program Manager for both ruminants and swine. She has built a solid experience as a technical advisor, has been part of numerous emergency preparedness groups, and has been involved in multiple responses to disease outbreaks. Since March 2024, Dr. Toupin is leading the team that is developing the HPAI in dairy cattle event response plan. With that, I'll pass it over to you, Jen. I'm not able to see your video.
You're not able to see my video.
I can now.
You can now? Okay, perfect. And you can hear me okay?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, great. Let me just move that window here. Okay, good. So thank you for the introduction, Christine, and thank you to the Beef Cattle Research Council for organizing this webinar. I'm pleased to be here tonight to provide an overview of the response activities that would take place if FMD was detected in Canada. And thank you as well to Murray for his great presentation. He has just set the bar very high. Okay, so I'll just set some time just to make sure I don't go over. I'll start by flying over the worldwide situation, what the World Organization for Animal Health official disease status for FMD means when developing response policies for Canada. And I'll also barely touch the surface of what is a full FMD disease investigation and response by speaking to stamping out zoning and vaccination. I know talking about regulation isn't the sexiest part and probably not what interests you the most. However, recognizing CFIA's mandate may help in better understanding under what mindset policies are developed and decisions are made, and will also help every level of stakeholders to prepare themselves for a potential FMD incursion. CFIA is a science-based regulator and dedicated to safeguarding food, animals, and plants, which enhance the health and well-being of Canada's people, environment, and economy. So Murray already told you about the disease itself and how indistinguishable it is from vesicular diseases, and that it is also reportable in Canada under the Health of Animals Act. So I won't spend more time on this. I'd like to add a few more things, though, about those 7 distinct serotypes of the FMD virus that Murray also indicated. And if you look at the pie diagram on the right, each color represents one of these 7 serotypes. And if I could zoom in, you would see over 65 fine lines that each represent a different strain. And why am I mentioning this? Well, because it's closely linked to vaccination, as conventional inactivated FMD vaccines for one serotype don't protect animals against other serotypes of FMD virus. And that this RNA virus tends to reassert continuously. So I'll speak a little to it later. As we said, FMD is considered highly contagious because it can easily spread by numerous routes, by the movement of live infected animals, by the movement of contaminated animals' product and byproducts, contaminated vehicles, equipment, contaminated clothing and footwear from staff, visitors, and also by wind under certain conditions of humidity, but wind. So we need to keep that in mind. This disease has devastating economic consequences, resulting in restrictions on international trade of animals and animal products from infected countries, as well as high costs associated with the implementation of disease outbreak control measures. It's the most important transboundary animal disease in the world. And even if the first case in Canada was in cattle, for example, international trade would stop for all susceptible species. So swine, sheep, goats, all of them. And for the whole country, not only the province where it would be found, the whole country. It's a complete border shutdown. The projected economic impacts of an outbreak of FMD in Canada depends on the size of the outbreak. So if it's a small one, let's say 50 infected premises, it could cost close to $20 billion. But if we end up with a large outbreak in areas where the density of susceptible animals is greater, and let's say we reach 1,500 infected premises, then we reach close to $65 billion. So it's huge. Fortunately, Canada has been free from FMD since 1952. The last outbreak happened in Saskatchewan, but it was really small. It was confined to a small portion of that area. We have strict import controls that are in place in Canada to prevent the disease from entering, but there's still illegal meat products that can enter the country. And like Marie said, that is one important risk factor for Canada. The only good news with the FMD is that it doesn't pose a risk to human health or food safety. Here I'm showing a global map of the most recent outbreaks. You can see them in red in the world. That one has been last updated in 2024. So this one doesn't include the Germany case, but I'll have another one that will show. So it's really more to show those 7 endemic pools, and those comprise separate ecosystems that maintain independently. They are maintained and virus circulate independently. So the evolving foot and mouth disease virus genotypes will circulate in each of these different pools. The absence of specific report, it should be assumed that the serotypes indicated are continuously circulating in parts of the pool area, and it would be detected if sufficient surveillance was in place. Actually, the COVID situation, if we look at data, there's a huge gap for those years that the whole world was handling COVID, because of course resources had to be put onto COVID more than on FMD. So in those endemic countries, the data is less important in those years. What's important with those pools is that when we know what usually circulate in one, and we find another serotype that doesn't usually circulate in that pool, we know that there was a translocation of the virus from another pool, and that indicates that there might be new routes of transmission or smuggling or things like that happen, and it may increase the risk for some countries. So that's the type of information that we closely look at, especially when the time comes to determine what type of strains should be entering our vaccine banks. Okay, sorry. So WOA is mandated by the World Trade Organization to officially recognize disease-free areas of countries for trade purposes. So there's around 170 listed diseases at WOA for which safe trade recommendations exist. FMD is one of the 6 diseases that have what's called the WOA official disease status. And this means that for a country to be recognized as free, stringent requirements needs to be met before WOA officially recognized it. This slide here is to show that there's 3 different status that exist for FMD at WOA. So if we start at the bottom, number 3 in red, for a country where FMD is endemic, like for most of Africa and the Middle East, if they want to improve their trade perspective, they could decide to implement a preventative vaccination program, which is similar to what we do here with our own endemic diseases. And by vaccinating their susceptible population, their objective is to eradicate the disease to reach the next level in yellow that you can see here, which is the free where vaccination is practiced. And if they're able to maintain freedom, and it's usually for a minimum of 2 years, they could decide to stop vaccination and hope to reach the FMD free where vaccination is not practiced. That level is the gold standard. That's what Canada has, and most of the North American and Western Europe countries, as well as Australia. And that's really the ticket to trade. Okay, here's the map of the current situation. It's the latest global map. It's from January 2025. So you can see in the middle of Europe here, you have Germany with their case. So FMD still remains a widespread globally. So all the areas in gray means those countries don't have official status, so they're considered endemic. As we said, Africa, Asia, Middle East, part of South America, mostly Venezuela is where there's the most FMD cases in South America. The rest of South America, those countries have zoning and are recognized as FMD free with or without vaccination, like I just explained. In Germany, it was a couple of I believe it was 14 water buffaloes that were in that herd that was depopulated, and so far they have tested, they have imposed movement restrictions, and they also have tested a bunch of susceptible animals, and so far it's still negative, and it's still that only infected premise. So that's good news. We hope it's going to stay like that. And free countries are in green, and as I said, located mostly North and Central America, Australia, New Zealand, Chile, and several countries in Western Europe. Okay, as I said, what dictates CFIA's policies are really international trading rules, and most of which are set by WOHA Terrestrial Code. If ever FMD is introduced in Canada, our objective is to recover as quickly as possible the WOHA status that we have now, and that allows us for export, which is, as I said, the FMD-free country where vaccination is not practiced. This is our desired outcome and end state, and right from the start for any FMD outbreak. So our CFIA FMD response plans are written with this objective in mind. When we mention a free status where vaccination is not practiced, this refers to routine vaccination and not emergency vaccination. With this free status, we cannot practice routine FMD vaccination in prevention of an outbreak because we would lose our free status. But we can practice FMD emergency vaccination as a disease response tool during an outbreak, as it might be required if early epidemiological indicators predict a large-scale outbreak. With animal disease of such a national magnitude, CFIA has the lead response role with a close provincial and industry partnership. And currently, we are working in collaboration with Animal Health Canada. We have a working group in place with different industry partners and provincial government, and we are actually working on improving and enhancing our preparedness efforts. So both national and local stakeholder machinery would be quickly overwhelmed in the face of an FMD outbreak. So there's really a need for FMD preparedness plans by all involved stakeholders, which also includes veterinarians and producers. So the basic principles of the FMD response, which are stated by WOHA, are first stamping out. So what does that mean? It's really eradicating the source of the disease agent by destruction of all animals that have been exposed or suspected of being exposed to the virus, dispose of their carcass, products, and byproducts, and then requiring a cleaning and disinfection of the infected premise. The other key component is movement controls on infected premise, on any suspect premise, and on all farms that have susceptible animals in the vicinity of that infected premise in order to prevent further spread of the disease agent to susceptible animals. Remember, I said that wind could carry the virus, so aerosols plays a big role in the spread of the disease. Zoning is another element that can be used with signage and control points to contain the disease agent to a geographic area. And the picture in the middle there comes from the UK back in the early 2000s when they had that FMD outbreak, which was kind of devastating to them. And if required, we can use emergency vaccination. And this is really with the intent to reduce the spread to susceptible animals. So I'll cover zoning and emergency vaccination more in detail in the next slides, as Canada is moving forward with the creation of its own FMD vaccine bank. Okay, that's my funny slide because I like for it to be less formal sometimes. FMD, it's a fast-moving disease. I mean, Bugs Bunny and the coyotes and the Roadrunner were part of my childhood. So it's just like, you need to chase it, you need to find it, and you need to stop it as quickly as possible. And to achieve this, the most important elements of their response are really stopping movement as quickly as possible and having the best tracing capabilities so that we know where animal went during the incubation period. Okay, don't try to read this slide. I have it here just to show the complexity of an FMD disease response. And that's an example of a timeline that summarizes the response activities on an infected premise and on the premises located in the vicinity of that infected premise. On this timeline, we mapped out the best estimated time that each response activity could take depending on the strategy used. And the strategy used here is stamping out only. So we're talking probably small-scale outbreak. Stamping out only is the basic FMD response for, like I said, small and localized outbreak. If every response action is done quickly, no need for vaccination. The shortest time that an FMD outbreak could last, if everything goes perfect, is 5 to 6 months, which is probably what will happen for Germany. Good for them. So the top of the line represents response activities on the IP. So it's really the population of animal, disposal of products and byproducts and the carcasses, and the cleaning and disinfection. But then there's a vacancy period to make sure that we gave time to the remaining virus after the CND may die. And then we will restock with sentinel animal just to make sure that nothing remained after all our CND actions. And under the line represent the response activities on the premise in the vicinity of that infected premise. So basically, it's movement restrictions and heightened biosecurity via zoning, and initially with a primary control zone, and then maybe with a containment zone that needs to be approved by WOA. And I'll cover that a little bit more in detail after. Of course, continued diagnostic and surveillance to prove that everything inside that containment zone is negative and to prove that our response measures are working, and surveillance outside of the containment zone in the free zone to prove everything is negative and free to trade. This can be confusing and I may lose some people here. So I think that in lack of time, I may just skip it. It's the slide that explains the WOHA containment zone. So it takes time. We only have one shot at it. the process may likely take a minimum of 1 month, and this is just to confirm the extent of the outbreak. And then there's a required 28-day surveillance period to prove absence of spread, and then we can provide our dossier to WOHA for them to approve. And if we were able to have that, that would lead us to something that could look like this. This slide is a summary of the different types of zone according to their objective. So initially, just after the detection of the FMD virus, movements, or actually those principles apply to any diseases. So movements are controlled on the premise by premise. It's on the premise by premise basis. So we're issuing a quarantine for each and every of them. So that is really cumbersome. During that time, the circulation of service providers within the zone are not legally prohibited, but are discouraged. And this is where a voluntary movement standstill by industry and by producer would be very important. Once CFIA can determine what limits and boundary we need for our primary control zone, then we can have the minister declare it. And in those zones, which are, if you look at the picture down there on the right, let's say you were able to determine you have 3 infected premises, which are the stars here. The infected zone is usually the 0 to 3 kilometer around those infected premises. So you have that. Sorry, I just clicked on the button. And so infected zone 0 to 3K. Then you will have a restricted zone, which is the 3 to 10 kilometers around the infected premises. And this usually is what is considered our primary control zone. And that's exactly what we're doing right now for HPI and poultry in the different provinces across Canada. We could add, based on our tools, our legal tools that we have, we could have also a zone that would be called a security zone. And all these would be considered our primary control zone. Then there's another legal tool available to us, which is called the secondary control zone, that acts as a buffer zone around it. And then everything outside of there is free. So that's when we need to have both surveillance inside and outside to determine the status. And once we have that in place, and that we're confident that it's really not circulating outside of our containment zone, that's where we can submit that dossier to WOHA. And this is where here we fall into, we're no longer doing, well, these zones are called the way they are for a trade purpose. So initially we do it for disease control with our PCZ, but when we change the name to the inner and outer zone for the containment zone for WOHA, it's really for a trade perspective. But what you need to keep in mind is that whether it's for disease control or for trade, those different zones are interlinked together. And really the intent is to restrict movement, issue permit when certain requirements are met to allow movement from one section to another, and allow trade, or if we can then just try to reduce the spread of the virus. And by reducing the spread of the virus, that means we reduce also the recovery time to get back to business. Okay, now we move on to FMD emergency vaccination. So once we have a detection, our lab are going to do the genomic on the virus and determine the strain. Once it's confirmed by our official lab, it must be matched with existing strains in the FMD vaccine banks. If finished vaccines are not available, then vaccines are prepared from vaccine antigen concentrates, which are diluted, put in vials, labeled, and shipped. And this could take between 10 and 14 days. And that's approximately the time that it could take us to establish the extent of the spread. So in short, what this means is that as soon as we have a detection in Canada, we would do exactly as Germany just did, and it would be to activate our vaccine bank. So vaccine would be prepared while we determine with our EPI investigation the extent of the outbreak and the need to actually use the vaccine. So we would have those vaccines shipped to Canada within 10 to 14 days, and then we would decide if we do use them or not. Because one thing, if we use it, that means additional surveillance on these vaccinated animals. So there's a good side to vaccination, but there's also a bad side to it. And we need to find the right balance between it, the pros and the cons. So the basics of emergency vaccination is, first, FMD vaccines are only used during an outbreak for emergency vaccination when you're a free country like we are. And they're not part of routine preventative vaccination, because FMD vaccination is only considered as the disease control tool once the disease is confirmed in Canada. And if the early outbreak indicators, which means elevated number of infected premise, number of infected premise increasing quickly, or high density area, all these indicators suggest that the outbreak could be large. And this is where we would, of course, look at using vaccination. The purpose of FMD vaccine is to limit the spread, as I said. So remember, this is not COVID. The objective is not to prevent animals from getting sick. It is mainly to reduce spread of the virus and shedding by these animals. So FMD vaccines are used to suppress the production of the virus. They are used primarily in that infected zone, so within that minimum 0 to 3 kilometer radius from the IP. And this is in order to prevent further spread of the disease agent to the outer layer, so that restricted zone in the 3 to 10K radius. And vaccination does not change the need to depopulate all infected animals. It's really, emergency vaccination is really done as an add-on to the stamping out infected premise. Actually, we will decide to use vaccination when we know we're not going to be able to depopulate quickly enough these animals. And there's no single FMD vaccine because there are many different strains, as indicated below. So we cannot vaccinate animals in advance because we don't know which strain is going to strike the countries. And this is why we really need to identify our strain, our strain that is circulating, and matching it with the closest strain in our bank. Although the vaccinated animal appear to be protected from clinical infection, subclinical infection may occur. So other results suggest that vaccination helps significantly reduce clinical signs in cattle and prevent viremia. So outbreaks in Japan in 2010, as well as South Korea in 2010-11, led to a rethinking of the use of vaccination during an outbreak in Canada and the US. So the following diagram shows how Japan was unable to control the outbreak. So see, the green line keeps getting higher and higher and higher. And of course, the more you have cases, the more animal you need to depopulate and the less resources you have to do so. So basically, you can see that by using only solder, the depopulation delays were on average 11 days. And that was only after they started vaccinating that they were able to overcome the epidemic, and then that the curve started to come down. This here is to show if we decide to vaccinate, vaccination will be initially localized to the infected zone. So it's not vaccinating across Canada. Like I said, it's not COVID or it's not the flu. It's really that infected premise here in the middle of that infected zone. We will probably decide to vaccinate the premises around it that has susceptible animal. And basically, usually cattle are targeted. Modeling shows that vaccinating cattle is what suppresses the most the spread of the disease, basically because they are the amplifier. Well, the pig is the amplifier, and the cow is the one that shows you the disease, but they do shed it a lot through inhalation. I will just rephrase that. Give me a sec. So pigs are the amplifier and they shed a lot of virus, but bovine infect themselves through inhalation. So they are the more at risk of getting infected. So that's why you get the best bang for your buck when you vaccinate cattle. Swine tends to get infected through ingestion, and usually the smuggled meat that comes in from these infected countries. If you feed scrap to pigs, that's how most of the European infections started. So they're the ones that are going to be sick, and they're going to be shedding thousands of virus particles in their respiratory secretion, and those aerosols are going to reach cattle, and then everything becomes a nightmare. Okay, just a few more slides. The last ones are really on the vaccine bank itself, and just give an idea of what this means. So a vac actually is a frozen concentrate that a company can quickly formulate into a ready-to-use vaccine in the event of the disease outbreak. So basically, those finished vaccines don't have a long shelf life. They will last for a year and a half, maybe sometimes shorter than that. And the vax have a longer shelf life of close to 10 to 12 years. And those vax takes roughly around 3 months to produce, because then they start from scratch. So it really takes a lot of time. So that's why there's a lot of advantage of having a vaccine bank ready and having these vax set aside and just waiting for to be finished and ready to use. So this set in advance bank helped to secure access to equivalent of 2.5 million doses of each of 12 strains of greatest risk. And those strains are selected on precise indicator, and of course, we keep them secret, so I will not share that here, but it will depend on what's circulating outside in the world, what type of travelers that and from which country they're coming. So that are all factors that we will take into consideration. A limited number of finished vaccine could also be purchased to be stored in Canada, but there's cons about this, is that finished vaccine, as I said, have a short shelf life compared to the vax. And this means that stocks would need to be replenished regularly. It also means that you need to keep a bigger set of those different vaccines, because you don't know which strain you will end up needing. Okay, the last slide is really more technical, and I don't necessarily want to go into details because I'm really not a specialist on that front. We have our vet biologic division here at CFIA that are the expert on this. But basically, just some key elements. The 1PD50, that's enough viral antigen to protect 50% of the animals. And when they add 6 times that amount of antigen in those emergency vaccines to produce strong immunity. So for emergency vaccine, it's usually 6 PD50s that are used versus 3 PD50 for preventive vaccination program in endemic countries. So there's a difference. So the immunity will be stronger and faster when using emergency vaccines. It's a double emulsion formula that contains water droplets. And usually for cattle and swine, it's 2 milliliter that needs to be injected. Swine, though, require 2 doses, 21 days apart. Not cattle, they usually get enough antigen production after the first shot. It's given intramuscularly, and it's we ask for a bottle that contains 50 doses, so 100 mLs per bottle. And basically, currently, as I said, with Animal Health Canada, we're working on our preparedness effort, and one of these components is to have some pushbacks ready. So CFIA would prepare the required number of those, the syringes, all the material and equipment that is needed to go on a farm to vaccinate the animal. So a lot to come on that front. And I think I will skip that slide because in lack of time and to be able to answer any question, I'll just conclude quickly. So FMD is a very complex disease to respond to and will require the support of all stakeholders. Some key elements for a swiftly response are early movement control and speedy tracing. And emergency vaccination is an additional response tool to be used when stamping out alone isn't enough. So with that, I will stop sharing and give Christine the control back.
Perfect. Thank you, Jen. That presentation was fantastic. You and Murray have provided lots of valuable information for Canadian veterinary professionals. So we've had a number of questions come in, so we will move into the live Q&A session. Jen, Murray, and Kemi, if you're all able to have your audio and video on, we will start answering questions. So to start off, if you suspect an FMD case on farm and you're on that farm, can you leave that farm? Or in other words, what are the protocols to follow when you're leaving that farm if there is a suspected FMD case?
You want me to take that one, Marie? Okay. Ideally, you stay there because that virus is so sneaky that you really don't want to be the one that is dragging it somewhere else. So I would recommend that you have your CFIA district office phone number on your cell, in your contacts, so that you don't have to look for it. And if you're on a premise and you suspect something, just call your district veterinarian. They will be able to discuss with you what the clinical signs you're seeing. And it's possible that even after that discussion, they'll tell you, no, doesn't seem like FMD. I don't think you should be concerned about that. So you're fine. But if there are real concerns, yes, we would ask that you stay there, and we will come. Like Murray indicated, CFIA offices have go kits. So in a matter of sometimes 30 minutes, an hour, they can be there, and they will set some biocontainment lines, assess the situation. And after that, it's easier to determine how we can, if it's a high risk, how we can help the veterinarians get out securely of the premise using the right biocontainment measures and the appropriate decontamination, or maybe it will be just considered as a low risk, and then the measures might be not as high. Hope that answered the question.
Yes, thank you, Jen. Moving on to the next question is, how do you prevent FMD? And this might go back to a couple of your slides, Murray, where you talked about biosecurity measures.
Yeah, I'll take that one. The last 3 slides that I presented is pretty much how we present FMD. So slide 1 was we don't have FMD in Canada, so it can only come in if it manages to come in across our borders. So as far as the travel goes, having people on your premises who travel to FMD positive areas is one way it could come in. The meat, as I said and Jen said, raw unpasteurized dairy, wool and hides. So travel and the risk of bringing the virus into the country, the more we can mitigate that, the better we will be at preventing FMD. Now, you can't control everybody who travels. That's obvious. And so on your premises, then having good, strict biosecurity, it won't go into the details of all that, because the resources are out there. Good biosecurity, a good disinfectant that has the ability to kill a non-enveloped virus. And then the last one was the preparedness. So go over sort of an action plan, incident command, whatever you want to do to prepare for your premise if you did have signs of FMD, how you were going to handle that to stop the spread from that premise onto other premises as well. So, minimize the risks of bringing it into the country, strong biosecurity, and be prepared.
And one thing I would add to minimize the risk of introduction in the country, CFIA already has import requirements. So anything that is imported legally, I mean, FMD is the top virus or agent on the list that we take measures to prevent introduction. So basically, nothing can be imported from those endemic countries. As soon as the case in Germany was notified to OA and to other countries, all the importation from Germany were stopped, were halted. So it's really anything that would be illegally entered into the country that we need to be careful with.
Yeah, sorry, if I could add a little to that. And yes, so I'm going to talk based on my professional experience. I haven't seen an FMD outbreak before, and I know that prevention can never be overemphasized. It's really way better to prevent than trying to mitigate or treat this. Well, there's no treatment for FMD anyways. So yeah, it's really, really important to just add to what Maurice said about biosecurity. And also because based on the impact, I've seen devastating impact of FMD on the economy, like the losses due to culling, movement restrictions. So it's just better to, to make sure you have strict biosecurity measures and also prevent importation of meat products from endemic countries. Thank you.
Thank you for answering that one. We've got a question from Dr. Eugene Jansen, and this one is directed at you, Murray. He indicates or says that the image of FMD that you showed could easily be mistaken for many other conditions, thus lowering the threshold of concern of the producer for his affected animal. And his main concern is the current surveillance capability within Canada.
Yeah, I can try to address all three of Dr. Jansen's comments. I mean, his first point is valid. That was my point too. There's no differentiating vesicular diseases, and there's a lot of things that can cause it that aren't FMD as well. So, things like chemical burns, BBD, IBR, the whole works, which is why I emphasize that I do think the last webinar the BCRC had, the Don't Be a Richard one, was very important to get that awareness at the level of the producer on what vesicular diseases look like. The pictures, as I said, are just pictures of foot and mouth disease as a vesicular disease. And the nightmare scenario that I described is very similar to what Dr. Jansen's referring to, the call up a week or 2 weeks later from a producer who tried to manage it themselves, and then it wasn't getting better, and then all of a sudden we've got signs of FMD. So I agree, surveillance capability probably needs to be enhanced. We are working on enhanced surveillance for all these diseases. Kemi can tell you more about CanSpot ASF as far as African swine fever surveillance, and they're starting the discussions around foot and mouth surveillance. Highly pathogenic avian influenza sort of disrupted those a little bit. So those are all valid concerns and points, and thank you for echoing the ones that I made. We are working on those. Those discussions are happening.
All right, just to add to what Murray said about CAHSS ASF. Yeah, CAHSS ASF is the national surveillance for early detection of African swine fever in Canada, and it's started in 2020, and we have surveillance activities going on at the abattoirs, both the federal and provincial. And we also recently just added the wild pig surveillance as well. And it is voluntary, but we do have quite a number of samples being collected and and tested at CAHSS lab, which is the Canadian Animal Health Surveillance Network laboratories. They're all approved laboratories for testing of ASF. And till date, all samples tested negative. And for more information on CanSpot ASF, you can always check our website on animalhealthcanada.ca, CanSpot ASF. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Kemi. While you're unmuted still, Kemi, there is a question on the EU FMD course. She indicates that she took it about 5 to 7 years ago, and has it changed significantly?
Yes, that's a good question. Well, I do not work at FAO, but I know over the last years, like 5 to 7 years, like the person said, it has changed. The EU FMD virtual learning platform now has different ranges of courses tailored to various aspects of FMD. I think they've recently, we have the real-time training, we have specialized courses as well. So it has evolved and also includes engagements with trainers and also interactive sessions. So because I took ASF course with the EU, sometimes last year, and it was a really interesting and interactive session. So I do encourage people to register for the course. Thank you.
Christine, if I may add to this, the EU FMD course right now, it's the 4th edition that has been Canadianized. So 7 years ago, it wasn't the Canadian context in the course. So yes, it has improved a lot. And we have subject matter expert from CFIA that are trainer on that course, and that helped develop it for the Canadian context.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Next question is, how much does the FMD vaccine cost?
You mean to Canada, or you mean to the producer? Nothing to the producer, because the cost of vaccination are covered by CFIA. So from a legal standpoint, we order vaccination. So yeah, basically the cost of the vaccine and the equipment, the material per se, are covered by CFIA.
Next question is, with multiple species at risk, including wildlife, we all talk about prevention. I wonder why not increase in-border security to help specifically with foot and mouth or ASF?
Well, I can start. I mean, right now, the risk, as we said, the risk of introducing the virus in Canada, I will stick to FMD, but the entry pathways are similar with African swine fever as well. And it's really through illegal meat. It's really the most important, the literature review, the risk assessment that our science brands have done are all showing that it would be through that pathway mainly that it could enter Canada. So right now, the border requirements through importation are, I would say, really safe. So the risk to Canada is not that high of FMD introduction, and that's why we've been free since 1952.
Thank you, Jen. Next question is, if a person travels to an area with FMD, how long should they wait until going onto a Canadian farm?
Ideally, 14 days. That's always a recommendation. This virus can remain in the nasal passage. So yes, it's preferable 14 days. If it's a producer and he needs to handle his animal, there's different measures that can be put in place. But I would recommend for those specific cases that the discussion that they have a discussion with their veterinarian, and if their veterinarian does not necessarily have all the answer, CFIA district office is for sure there to provide any assistance in finding the best approach for that producer to be able to continue caring for his animal, but in a secure way.
Thank you, Jen. We've got one last question. Is sampling the wild boar population on the prairies enough to ensure it doesn't become endemic in this population?
Is that for ASF, I believe? Yeah. So sampling of wild boar is just part of the method of enhancing the ability to detect ASF in Canada. So yes, it's also part of the, not just wild boar, like I said, so but it is it's not enough, but it definitely strengthens our capabilities in early detecting ASF in Canada. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kemi. That covers all of the questions.
Christine?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I think we might have skipped one, which is interesting. It's about the border control. So how to strengthen and stop illegal importation of animal products. And one of the things that was done for African swine fever in particular, but that serves FMD as well, is the use of sniffer dogs, trained sniffer dogs, and enhance those inspection at the border. So that's the best mean that we have in Canada with the collaboration with the Canadian border controls.
Okay, thank you for answering that one. I did miss that one. So thank you again to all of you for your incredible presentations, and to all of those that spent the evening with us. If your questions did not get answered, I would encourage you to reach out to your veterinarian, local extension agent, provincial producer organization, or reach out to us on social media. Don't miss the next webinar, which will be held on March 19th, focusing on the ins and outs of parasite management. If you are registered for this webinar, you are automatically registered for that one. And with that, I will wish everyone a great night and hope you have a good rest of your evening. And thank you again to our speakers.